We watch only the degree. Anza kuna chirichiwa sonyo wale mpaka chipangi o chikonga tunyomba baisi ya korero tia kuna kene yo simuta udi to kene kero nanda change password yo mpesa ndi ya tu ni yes brother
Inafanyika huku bana kaji.
Who's teaching?
Yes, good morning, class. Welcome to our biology lesson. I think it's a lesson. So I request your cooperation, keen listening, and decided we are starting with what topic
Guys, you tusikie
transport in plants and animals. I hope we are all together. Together, I have shared a screen on this platform, so can you follow link? Transport in animals, and I've said transport moment. Transport in plants and animals. So, transport. What do you mean by the word transport in biology? In conventional biology, before we even indulge in transport, I'd like us to highlight something very small and so that we are all together. So I would like to share something on the screen. That is biology 2 work. We have
my guys, mute hizi stuff zenyu man.
Yes, kindly those who are talking or those who are talking, can you kindly keep quiet as we continue? Before we continue with the transport itself, let us try to go through this thing here about by the end of the Form 2 work. This before the whole Form 2, but now I would like us to talk about by the end of this topic, the learner should be able to, one, what is expected of you in this topic. Number one is define the term transport. That's what I was about to start. Number two, list substances that are transported both in plants and animals. What are those substances that are transported in plants and in animals? So you should be able to list them down, you should be able to know them, so that at least we can say these are the things that are transported. Number three, we link the surface area to volume ratio of organisms to the transport system of the organisms. So there's an aspect of volume ratio, surface area to volume ratio, which we all know is has relation with how materials are transported. So because of that, number three and number four, explain the necessity. Moment. Okay, we continue. I was talking about materials that are transported and the surface area to volume ratio in respect to transport in organisms. Then from this topic, by the end of it, we are also expected to be able to explain necessity of transport in animals and plants, importance of transport in plants and animals, or generally the living organisms. What are the importance? Why must the organisms have transport within their body? So that's what we are expected to be able to explain necessity. Then number five, draw the structure of roots and the root hair. So by the end of this topic, we are expected to draw and of course well label the diagrams of the roots. Of course, we've gone through this, and the root hair, because these are very important elements as far as transporting plants are concerned. Then relate the structure of the roots to their functions. Structure of the roots and their functions, to relate them. So that's what we are expected to do by the end, or to be able to carry out by the end of this lesson. Then another one, observe prepared slides of the roots and the root hair, so that we are able to identify those parts you have mentioned. Compare monocotyledon and dicotyledonous root sections, and of course also the stem. Observe charts, drawings of the root sections, because those are from our notes. We are able to get that. Then draw and label the structure of the xylem vessel. Define the xylem vessel. Relate the structure and structure of the xylem vessel to its function. The trachea element that is under the vascular tissues, that is the xylem and the phloem. Remember that. So we are expected by the end of this topic to be able to relate their structures, function, adaptations, and everything to do with the xylem and the phloem, as we have discussed. So these are some of the areas that we are going to interact with in this session. I believe by the end of the lesson will be somewhere around there. So we'll start with this, and henceforth we are going to look at this bit by bit, so that we remind ourselves what we have learned in this topic. So I'll go back to now the main topic, that is transport. So transport in plants and animals. So having in mind what I've just shared with you, now we are able to look at this content vis-a-vis what we are expected to be able to explain or define or describe or draw at the end of the topic. So bear in mind those aspects. So transport in plants and animals, that's our topic in Form 2, the first topic, and it is very, very important topic because as you have gone through the whole syllabus from Form 1 to Form 4, you realize there are materials that are supposed to be moved from one point to another within the living organisms, be it in any process that we undertake as living organisms. We must have an element of transport in it because we have to move materials from one point to another. Materials are not maybe where they are required, or some are where they are not required. So what does that mean? It means they have to be moved. So how do we define transport? Because that's one of the specific objective of this topic, to be able to define transport. So transport is defined as movement of materials or substances from one part of the organism's body to another. Movement of materials or substances from one part of the organism's body to another part of the organism's body. That is what we mean by transport as far as biology is concerned. I know some of you take maybe business or even in geography or history, we talk of transport of goods and services. This also transport, but now we are dealing with living organisms. That's why you have transport in plants and animals and generally living organisms. So it should be very clear that it is movement of materials from one part of the organism to another part of the organism's body. In case of cell or unicellular organism, it can be defined as movement of material from one part of the cell to another part of the cell, because now the whole organism, which is a unicellular organism, is made up of only a single cell. So you cannot say it is from one part of the body to another. It is basically within the same cell, which we now take as the whole organism. So the materials are moved from one point of the cell to another part of the cell. In multicellular organisms, like the higher plants and all that, materials can move from one cell to another. So those materials which we are going to mention will move from one part of the, or rather from one cell to another cell. That's also transport. Movement of material which we are going to mention from one part of an organism, which is now from a cell to another cell. That's also an transport. So that is very, very important. Then point number 2 is about this movement. How do this movement occur? You realize in Form 1, the 4th topic about cell physiology, we discussed about those physiological processes that enable materials to move into or out of the cell, from one part of the cell to another, from one organism to another. Those are sorry, the 3 processes, diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, they enable the movement of these materials you're talking about. So that movement is either through osmosis, through diffusion, or in case of water, through osmosis rather, through diffusion, through active transport. Those are basically the processes that enable the movement to occur. That does not mean it is the only one. That does not mean it is. Those are the only ones. So movement can occur majorly through those 3 processes. So let us come to now materials that are transported. 1, we have nutrients, we have gases, respiratory gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. We have waste products, metabolic waste products from those cells to their excretory organs for onward excretion. So those are some of the hormones. We also have hormones. We have water. Water is part of nutrients, of course. We have in animals, we can also talk about the distribution of heat around the body. It's a form of transport. So all these materials are transported from one point to another based on how they are required or sought. So we have those materials. So remember, in our specific objectives, we say we should be able to list down those substances that are transported. So I repeat again, one, we have nutrients. Of course, we know these nutrients including glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, water, vitamins around the body, mainly from the digestive system to the cells through the circulatory system in animals. In plants, we have something like carbon dioxide that have to be moved from one point to another. We have those manufactured food to be moved from where they are to, and from where they are manufactured in the leaves to other parts of the body. So all these are materials that are rather the nutrients that we are talking about. Then we have hormones in animals, hormones in plants, which are transported. We have waste products, nitrogenous waste products in animals, gaseous waste products in plants, and also in animals. The gases that are not required, like carbon dioxide, have to be eliminated from the animal's body and also plant's body to some extent. Then oxygen from plant's body after photosynthesis also needs to be eliminated. So those are some of the materials that are transported around the body from where they are not required henceforth and to where they are required. So that brings us to now another point, that is need for transport, necessity. One of our specific objectives, we said necessity of transport. One, carry required substances to the body parts where they are required to carry out some functions. That is very important. Number two, removal, removal of waste products, especially metabolic waste products from the body of the living organism. So these are the two very important necessity or importance of transport in living organisms. One, we said to carry required substances, which remember we said include nutrients, include hormones, from one point of the body, especially from the organs that bring them in, to another area where they are now required to be used. Then removal of metabolic waste products. These are basically the processes that occur in the cells, the tissues that produce the metabolic wastes, like nitrogenous waste, carbon dioxide. Okay, these have to be eliminated from the body. So they have to be moved to excretory organ for onward expulsion. So those are the two very important, rather two importance of transport in plants and animals and generally in living organisms. I hope up to there we are together. We move on. We have organisms that are referred to as lower organisms and simple multicellular organisms. So before you come to plants and animals, we need to also look at these organisms and see how they undertake their transport. So we have lower organisms. These are very simple single-celled organisms and also multicellular organisms that are referred to as simple. So we move on. Organisms have small body size, bodies that make them have large surface area to volume ratio. Remember surface area to volume ratio we mentioned in the specific objectives, that we need to relate them to the way organisms undertake transport. So these single-celled organisms or simple multicellular organisms have small bodies that make them have large surface area to volume ratio. I hope this is clear. We don't have to repeat what that means. Diffusion alone is enough to transport substances in this organism. So because of this large surface area to volume ratio, simple diffusion is enough to transport materials in these organisms. Don't require complex structures or systems for transport. It is enough to transport these materials by simple diffusion. And we know diffusion as movement of molecules from the region of higher concentration to region of lower concentration. So that is what these organisms use as far as transport is concerned. For example, you have amoeba, plasmodium. These ones use this simple transport system known as simple diffusion for them, because these organisms are mainly made up of a single cell. So whenever they want to take in nutrients or to move nutrients within the body, it is simply through simple diffusion. When they want to undertake gaseous exchange, simple diffusion is enough, because oxygen from the dissolved oxygen that is dissolved in water from the surrounding area can get into the cell of the single-celled organism through simple diffusion. Carbon dioxide can get out through simple diffusion based on concentration gradients. So take note of that. Now we come to higher organisms. These organisms, higher organisms means now these multicellular organisms that have huge body structures made up of numerous cells and tissues, and systems, organs, and all that. So these organisms have large bodies, thus smaller surface area to volume ratio. What does that mean, or what does that imply? Hence, tissues and organs are far from the site of supply of materials. Site of supply of materials, like for example, for nutrients, it is through the digestive system. But this food or the nutrients will not be used there. They have to be taken to far away areas like the legs and other parts of the body. And that means now there must be a system that enables these materials to reach there. Therefore, they require an elaborate transport system. I've just mentioned this. Because of their large bodies, meaning small surface area to volume ratio, materials need to move to different parts of the bodies of these organisms due to their numerous cells, tissues, organ system, which require these materials. And also they also require to get rid of what they don't want in their body, in their cells, in those cells. Hence, now, do you think simple diffusion can do that? The answer is definitely no. Simple diffusion cannot undertake the transport in these higher animals like me and you and all the plants, higher animals, because of the vastness of the body parts and the distance between one organ and the other. You can imagine brain requiring oxygen and nutrients, and they don't absorb this on their own. They depend on the respiratory system to bring in the oxygen to the body. Then circulatory system carry these nutrients from the digestive system, and get oxygen from the respiratory system, the lungs, all the way to the brain. So simple diffusion definitely cannot do that. And that's why these higher animals require an elaborate transport system that enable them to take in their materials and get rid of what they don't want. So I hope that one is clear. So that is an introduction to transport in plants and animals in general. We've seen the importance, the definition of transport, the importance of transport, materials that can be transported, and also we've touched about the unicellular organisms and how they undertake the transport, and we said it is via simple diffusion. Then for the higher organisms now, we said simple diffusion cannot be enough to undertake transport of materials from one part of the body to the other because of the vastness of the body and the numerous cells that are involved, and also the distance between one system and the other, and or one organ and another. That is why now we need to look at transporting plants separately, and these mechanisms or the system that is involved, and also the transporting animals on their own. So this brings us now to transport in plants. Simple plants, of course, we know plants are categorized into three. And the kingdom Plantae, we have three divisions of plants. We have Bryophytes or Bryophyta, which is the simplest plants of all. We have Pteridophyta, a bit more advanced, and then we have Spermatophyta, which are very much advanced. So because of this, we look at this in all those aspects, because you cannot rule them out. You cannot leave them out. Simple plants like mosses and liverworts, this is under division Bryophyta. Simplest animals, plants. Simplest plants. They are very small, and also they are not complex as the other divisions of the plant. So the transport of substances in these plants, moss and liverworts, are by simple diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Remember, they are unicellular. They are very small in size, and simple diffusion. They are not unicellular per se, but they can be seen, of course. We can see them from those dumpy areas and all that. But then they are very small. They have less developed transport system. If you remember, Form 3 work and characteristics of these bryophytes, we say they are simple, lack transport system like the xylem and the phloem and all that. They are less developed. They are not differentiated into three body parts, roots, stem, and the leaves. So these ones, they don't have much stress as far as transport is concerned. So simple diffusion, osmosis, and active transport is enough for them, because they can easily take materials that are required in and those that are not required out through diffusion, like gases, osmosis, like of course water, active transport, like maybe mineral salts. So these substances are effectively transported by these three processes. So they don't have any problem with that. Then we come to now higher plants, plants that are a bit advanced, and that is mainly, we're talking about now the Spermatophyta. The Spermatophyta, those who are ticking for us, can you stop that please? Can you stop that please? Kindly refrain from rectifying our screen, so that at least we don't have issues. Higher plants have specialized transport system known as vascular bundles. So if you hear about transport in higher plants, what should come into your mind should be vascular bundles. Even if you're waking up in the middle of the night, saa 8 ya usiku, ulizwe anything about transport in animals, in higher plants, or generally plants now, because that's how we refer to them, is or should be vascular bundles. So you don't even require to think about it. So it should come, it should be at your fingertips. As far as we're talking about transporting plants, what should come into your mind is vascular bundles or vascular tissues. And this include xylem and phloem. This includes xylem and phloem. So anytime you talk about transporting plants, be it water, be it food materials, then we talk of transport, rather we talk of vascular bundles or vascular tissues. Then now we have xylem. When we talk of xylem, xylem transports water and mineral salts. That one, the two of them must be together, water and mineral salt. And when you are told, for example, in an exam, these some common mistakes that are usually committed by students or candidates. When you talk of, you are told state functions of vascular bundles, you say transport of water, transport of dissolved food or manufactured food. That one, there's something missing. Yes, it is true, but then it is not correct as because when we talk of vascular bundles, this one comprises of xylem and phloem. So you must differentiate the two. You must talk about the xylem, the role it plays, and also the phloem, the role it plays separately. So don't just generalize and say they transport water and food. Yes, we know they transport water and food, but specifically, you must talk about xylem transporting water and actually water molecules and mineral salts from the roots. So when you talk of transport, you must indicate the origin or the source of those substances and the destination. So if you are asked, where are you going? You must say your location. When you are coming from home to school, your origin or where you are coming from is home, and the destination is the school, for example. So when you talk about transport, this is very, very important. Of any substances, if anything, you must include the origin or the source and the destination. Where are they going? So when you talk of xylem transporting water and mineral salts, it must be from the root hair cells. Remember the root hair cells? We're going to look at them. The root hair cells absorb water and mineral salts through diffusion, through osmosis and diffusion and active transport. Once now the water and these waste and mineral salts are in the roots, they now go to the xylem. Of course, we know that across the cortex, across the endodermis, through the Casparian strip, and then into the xylem. Then from there, what happens? These water molecules and the mineral ions will move up the plant all the way to other parts of the plant, including the leaves, where they are used for photosynthesis and the development of the leaf for chloroplast and all that. So chlorophyll rather. So when we talk of transport in plants, we said we mentioned vascular bundles or vascular tissues, which include xylem and phloem. Xylem transports water and mineral salts from the roots all the way to the leaves and other parts of the plant. Then phloem now transports dissolved food substance. This manufactured food by the leaves through photosynthesis. So the materials that are manufactured include, of course, glucose, which will be converted into starch for storage, maybe in the starch granules, and also converted into this substance, sucrose, so that this food now can be translocated to other parts of the plant for either storage or usage. So it is through the xylem, and through the phloem, transport dissolved food from the leaves where they are manufactured to other parts of the plant for usage, because glucose have to be used for respiration, or the excess of this is stored either in the stem, either in the roots, in the seeds and all that. So that is what is all about vascular bundles. We have the xylem transporting water and mineral salts, and the phloem transporting dissolved food materials in form of what? In form of sucrose to the other parts of the plants for storage and for usage. So that is about the vascular bundles. Just briefly, because we're going to the details of them in a short while. We now come to internal structure of the roots. So before we continue with transport, remember, for you to transport something, you must have that thing that you are transporting. If a lorry comes to Nairobi after this lockdown now, many of them are coming to Nairobi to collect some goods. So for them to collect the goods, for them to transport those goods to wherever destination, they must be loaded with those goods. So you cannot transport what you don't have. You cannot carry what you don't have. If you're told to go and bring a book from maybe somewhere, you go to that place and you did not find the book. So when you come back, you have not transported that book to whoever has sent you. Why? Because you did not see it or you did not find the book. Similarly, for this water and mineral salts to be transported from the roots to other parts of the plant, including the leaves, there must be presence of this water in the xylem. And where do we get the water from? From the soil. Plants absorb water from the soil. So for this water to be transported, they must be absorbed. So before we even start talking about how this water is transported, let us first look at the structure of the roots and the root hair, because this is where the water and mineral salts are absorbed into the plant body, into the xylem, and how they get there. So that from there now, this water the xylem now can have function. So if the roots are not absorbing water, xylem will not do anything. It cannot transport what it does not have. If the leaves are not manufacturing food, then the phloem cannot transport what is not there. That's impractical. That's impossible. So it is very important now for us to look at the internal structure of the roots and the root hair. So we have them here, the dicot and the monocot stem. You can have it there. Monocot and dicot stem. Monocot and dicot stem, rather roots. So if you see these extensions, of course we know these are the root hairs. So that means these are, the two diagrams here are representing the roots because of the presence of the root hair cells, this extension, among others. Then we have the monocotyledonous roots, the internal structure. How do we know them? Because we said we know this is the structure of the roots by the root hair cells. Now we want to differentiate between the the dicotyledonous and the monocotyledonous roots. So for the monocotyledonous roots, we look at the structure, the arrangement of the vascular bundles, the xylem and the phloem. The phloem and the xylem are arranged like this, alternatingly, where we have xylem, then phloem, xylem, phloem, xylem, phloem, all round, and they form a ring. I hope that is clear from the diagram, so you don't have to waste a lot of time here. Then we have the dicotyledonous root internal structure. Of course, this one is known by the star-shaped xylem at the middle here, star-shaped xylem, and now we have the phloem in the arms of the xylem arranged in that order. So this now shows this is the internal structure of the dicotyledonous. So of course there's that aspect of differentiating between the two, between these two. So we have, of course, how we are able to differentiate the stem from the root. That's also something else. So as we go along, we'll look at maybe the structure of the stem so that we are able to now differentiate between the internal structure of the stem and that of the roots. And then of the dicot and the monocot for both stem and the roots so that it becomes clear. We are looking at this because we want to understand how the structure of these roots and the root hair on this side are so that we are able to now relate it, how they absorb water and then transport this water up the plant through the xylem. So we want to give xylem work of transporting water and mineral salt by ensuring that the roots do their roles of absorbing this water. So the roots are adapted or modified to ensure that happens. So that is the internal structure of the roots. And then we look at here, this and this other side. On the right side, we have the structure of the root hair cell. A root hair cell is an adaptation that is found on the outer part of the root so that it can carry out the function of absorption of water and mineral salts. So the root hair cells are modified or adapted to carry out absorption of water and mineral salt. One of the adaptation is elongation. They are elongated. The root hair cells are elongated to increase surface area for absorption of water and mineral salt. Number two, you see this is the cell, but now it has an elongation. The root hair cell, the root hair is long. This is to increase surface area for what? Absorption of water. They have thin membrane, thin cell wall for absorption of, for rapid absorption of water and mineral salt. This cell subvacule here is highly or is hypertonic to the surrounding soil in water, water in the soil, so that they create some concentration gradient between the two, the soil, water, and the inside of the cell, so that it is able to absorb water through osmosis. So those are a few adaptations among others, so you don't have to labor much on that. Then we come to the next diagram. We have the structure of the cell, rather of the root. This one, this is now outer external features of the root. How the root is, starting with the root cap, of course, for protection. Sorry, for protection of the delicate meristematic cells here. So the root cap prevents damaging of these meristematic cells. Then, of course, we have the meristematic cells, where the cells undergo rapid division. This region is referred to as zone of cell division. Then we have this part here, zone of cell elongation and zone of cell differentiation. Move on, rather, sorry. Then, of course, in the middle here, we have xylem, the yellow one here, and phloem on the sides. Phloem are on the sides. Of course, here we have the cortex. We have the Casparian strip somewhere towards, of course, outside, that leads towards inside, where we have now water moving into the xylem. So that is external features of the root as it were. So we move on to the next part. This one is another structure showing how the roots, the internal structure of the roots look like. This cross section, you can see from here, from this tree, this part is cut. This is, of course, dicot plant. The root, that is the stem, and this is the root, star-shaped xylem, and the phloem in between the arms of the xylem. Then, of course, you can look at this. This is for the stem. We are coming to that as we move on. Then now, functions of the roots. Because we said it interests us to look at the root because they play important role of absorption of water, among other functions, that now supply water to the mineral salt to the xylem for onward reconduction, upward conduction to other parts of the plant body. So, primary functions of the roots: one, anchorage, and number two, absorption of the water and mineral salt. These are said to be primary, the core functions. Of course, there are other functions like storage. That one is not primary. That's not all the plants have their roots for storage. So those are some modifications. But the main function of all the roots in all the plants are anchorage, to hold the plants firmly into the ground so that it can be supported. Of course, under support, we also looked at that when we were dealing with support in plants. We said plants are supported by the roots because they anchor the plant to the soil. So that's a form of support. Then absorption of water and mineral salt. That's another core function of the roots, to absorb water and mineral salts so that the xylem now can carry them to the rest of the plant's body. Specialized roots store food, as we mentioned, like the cassava and the rest. Roots and water. We have others that store water, like those that are xerophytic, and also allow for gaseous exchange, like the mangrove in the marine environment or ecosystem. So, but the core function of these roots are to absorb water and mineral salts and anchor the plant firmly into the soil. So parts of the roots. So it is very important as we look at parts of the roots so that we know what they do or which part does which function. Root cap, we mentioned this from the diagram earlier shown, protects the apical meristem, the meristematic cells that are rapidly dividing. We have root hairs. These are microscopic outgrowth of the epidermal cells. They are thin-walled to shorten the distance for rapid absorption of water and mineral salts. So remember we say when we talk about thin membrane, thin wall, thin epithelium, as much as we talk of shorten the distance, this distance is because of wanting to have rapid diffusion of these materials across them. So don't just say like what we have here, to shorten the distance for absorption. There's something missing. That is for rapid or faster intake of water and mineral salt. Have an elongated cytoplasm at one end to increase surface area for absorption of water. Elongated, we mentioned that. We also talk about what? Hypertonic cell subvacule. Hypertonic, highly concentrated, filled with solute like what? Salt and sugar, so that they create that difference between the soil, water, and the water in the cell. Remember, for osmosis to occur, there must be two solutions of different concentration. So one solution is the cell sap that is hypertonic in the cells, the root hair cells, and the other solution is the water that is in the soil. It's also a form of solution. So there must be this difference in concentration so that movement of water molecules through osmosis can be achieved. So if the solution in the roots, the root cells are hypertonic, then automatically water through osmosis can get in. But if it is the other way around, sorry, if it is the other way around, what will happen? The water will be moving out of the cells into the soil. So that's when we have more water in the plant than in the soil. That's how drying occurs. Of course, there's another aspect of transpiration that gets rid of water, excess water in form of water vapor from the plant. So all these together, of course, they work together in tandem to ensure that there is enough water in the plant. So transpiration get rid of excess water up there with the stomata, and more have to be absorbed. So it will give space up there. Otherwise, there will be no absorption. So that's another aspect. Of course, that's under transpiration. But for the root hair cells, remember we talk about they are microscopic. They have thin-walled. They are thin-walled for rapid absorption of water and mineral salt. Elongated to increase surface area for absorption of water and mineral salt. We also talk about dense, rather highly concentrated cell sap or subvacule that now causes osmosis to occur. Move on, we have piliferous layer of the cell of the roots, a special epidermis of young roots that give rise to root hair. So this is the source of the root hair. They are specialized to ensure that root hair cells are formed. Then we have the cortex. This is now the inner. As we move into inner part of the root, we have the cortex, loosely packed thin-walled cells to allow passage of water molecules to reach the vascular bundle, that's the xylem, and to store water, store substances. So this is where some substances are stored, like sugar and some mineral salts. But basically, we have this cortex through which water molecules will move from one cell to another. They are loosely packed cells within cell walls. So water will move from one to the next until they reach the xylem. So they are arranged in that order from the outer part of the cell moving inside where we have the xylem. So that the water now will pass through there and go up the plant. Endodermis is a very interesting part here. Endodermis is a single layer of cells surrounding the vascular bundle. Single layer of cells surrounding the vascular bundle. I wish I can show you this. Just a moment. Here, if you look at this, the blue part here, the blue part here, you have a single layer of cells surrounding the vascular bundle. Is known as the endodermis. Its main function, it contains what is called Casparian strip that regulates the amount of water that gets into the xylem. So remember, as much as we are saying the root hair cells are absorbing water, not all water will go into the xylem at the same time or just anyhow. They don't scramble for the water, for the xylem. They are regulated so that just enough amount of water required will go up the plant. Otherwise, it will lead to a problem of, can even burst the xylem and all that. So to avoid that kind of problem, the Casparian strip ensures that it regulates amount of water that will pass through, amount of mineral salt that will pass through, and that way there's an order, there's a regulated form of movement of water from the soil to through the cortex. Remember the cortex? This is the cortex that we were talking about. So the water that is absorbed, the molecules by the root hair cells will go across the cortex here, across the cortex, and into the endodermis. Then there's now regulation, not all the water will get in, and this regulation will also spill over to this, to the absorption. So it will not just absorb anyhow because it is being regulated at the middle here. Then the amount of water that is now allowed to pass through will go in and get into the xylem and then move up the plant. So you can go back now. So we are saying a single layer that characterized by possession of starch grains and Casparian strip. Casparian strip has impervious deposits. Impervious means it will not allow all the water to pass through. It controls the amount of water and mineral salt entering into the xylem. So that is the work of the Casparian strip. Controls the amount of water and mineral salt that enters into the vascular bundles. Then we have pericycle, single layer beneath the endodermis that gives rise to lateral roots. We have lateral roots, the side roots. Lateral means sides. So we have pericycle, single layer of cells beneath the endodermis that now gives rise to these roots that grow on the sides. Then within the root we have the vascular bundles. Each vascular bundle consists of xylem and phloem. Of course, we know xylem will move water up the plant, and the phloem will bring food all the way from the leaves to the roots, because the roots also require energy to manufacture, to form energy through the mitochondria. That rings the bell, eh? Mitochondria. Why? Because of course there must be sugar, must be glucose to be broken down in the presence of what? Oxygen. So the roots, of course, through the cuticles will absorb oxygen, and then together with the glucose that is brought by the phloem, they manufacture energy. And that energy purposely is required to make the cell be alive, especially providing energy for active uptake of mineral salt. Remember, mineral salts are taken in through diffusion and active transport. So active transport here requires energy, which must be provided by the roots, and that is courtesy of what? Phloem bringing in food, manufactured food from the leaves. So that's why the roots also have phloem. Also water, now water is moving up, the food moving down through the phloem. So, and there's a very organized traffic system whereby they will not come into contact. Water passing through the phloem, through the xylem, and the dissolved food through the phloem, they'll never come into contact, and they are separated. One is moving up, the other one is moving down, and so the water molecules are taken up, the food is brought to all parts of the plant, of course, including the root. Then we have monocotyledon. The xylem alternates, of course, that's the arrangement about. We don't need to labor much on that. Epidermis, the single layer of cell covering all the inner tissue. This is the outermost part of the plants. The epidermis, a single layer of cells. You can look at it again from here. Epidermis, the outermost, this one here, the outermost part where, of course, the root hair cells are originating from. So it is the outermost part of the root and, of course, the whole plant. So those are some of the parts of the roots. Any question before we come to the stem and the function? So we've seen the structure of the roots, the functions of the roots, and how the roots are modified to carry out the function. One of the modification is presence of the root hair cells that are themselves modified so that they ensure enough water and mineral salts are taken in. So, yes, Michael Angwenyi, you are raising up your hand. Michael, where are you? Just a moment. Michael is raising up the hand. Michael, where are you? Michael, umepotea tena.
It is fine, I've understood.
Yes.
Nimeelewa, iko tu sawa.
Oh, sawa. Thank you. Who else? Nani mwingine? We continue. stem, structure, and function. So now that we have understood what and how the roots are adapted and their functions, so you realize that water molecules are taken into the plant through the roots, the root hair cells, through the cortex, through the endodermis and the Casparian strip. Then the water is now in the phloem, in the xylem. The water molecules and the mineral salts are now well in the xylem. So from here, the xylem will have to move this water up the plant to the other parts of the plant, especially the leaves of those photosynthetic cells to undertake photosynthesis. So how will that happen? These water molecules, the mineral salts, will not jump from the roots to the leaves. They must pass through the stem. So for us to be able to understand more on the transport of water molecules and the food within the plants, it is very important for us also to understand the stem structure and the and the function, just like the roots. Just like the roots. So the functions of the roots, primary functions of the, or rather stem, one, to support or anchor the plant. So what the roots are holding are actually the stem. And the stem hold the branches, the leaves, the flowers, the fruits, and the seeds. So it is a support mechanism, especially the mechanical support mechanism for the plants. Without this stem, then we may not talk of that needed support for the plants. And if you remember, when we are dealing with support in plants, we said the reason as to why plants require support is to expose the leaves for maximum absorption of carbon dioxide and sunlight energy, exposure of the flowers for the pollination, the agents of pollination like the wind, like the insects. Okay. We also said support is required so that the plant can carry its own weight, and this is through the stem. Of course, the stem has some structures within them, those strengthening tissues and all that. The parenchyma, collenchyma, the xylem itself is a support mechanism. So all these combined will ensure that the stem provides support to the plant, especially mechanical support. Then conducts water and mineral salt up the plant. This water we've just absorbed, the roots have just absorbed, cannot fly or cannot go through vacuum to the leaves. So they are conducted through the stem. So the one other function of the stem is to conduct water and mineral salt up the plant. Number 3, conduct manufactured food downwards and to all parts of the plant, especially the roots. So the stem will now bring in, of course, through the phloem. The phloem will be running through the stem, bringing food downwards. The stem has xylem that runs the length of it upwards, moving the water up. Other functions of the specialized stem. Now, before you come to that, we talked about 3 main functions of the stem. 1, support, mechanical support for the plant. Number 2, conduction of water and mineral salts. Number 3, conduction of manufactured food. This is basically 1. So the 3 are together. It's conduction of materials, whether up or down. So we have 2, support, mechanical support, and conduction of materials within the plant. Those are the 2 major functions of the plant. When you say primary function, these are basic functions, the major functions. That's why they are there. Then we have other functions of specialized stem now. We have some stems that are specialized to perform other functions, like storage of food and water. So the stem in some plants store food in terms of starch, others store water. Those are the fleshy, the succulent stem, they store water, especially in arid areas. Exchange of gas through what? You can remember this? Through the lenticels. Remember the coxels of the outer part of the stem? They have coxels that are made up of loosely packed, those cambium cells that form lenticels. So stem also for some plants carry out the function of gaseous exchange. Reproduction also play a role in reproduction for some plants. So those are some of the functions of the stem, major functions, and the other functions, specialized ones. These are not in all, in some. Not all of them are having stored food, not all of them are having stored water, not all of them are for gaseous exchange and for reproduction. They are for some special conditions. Having said that, let us now look at the structure of the stem, starting from outside, moving inwards. We have epidermis, of course, just like the roots and even the leaves. This is the outermost layer that protects the inner cells or inner tissues from mechanical damage, from what's it called, infections by the microorganisms. So the epidermis protects this, protects mechanical damage or injuries. Before the inner cells are damaged, you have to contend with epidermis. If you have a panga and you are cutting a tree, the stem of the tree, before you go deeper, you must first deal with that rough. Some of them are rough for the trees due to the age. So you have to contend with that and then you move inside. So the epidermis carry out the function of protection against mechanical damage and infection. So it is very hard for those microorganisms to pass through. So take note of that. Then we have cortex. This now as we move in. Simple tissues found in the cortex, we have collenchyma, parenchyma, sclerenchyma. This is basically for strengthening. Remember I mentioned stem, one of the functions is mechanical support. That support is provided via what? The strengthening tissues that we have in the name of collenchyma, parenchyma, and this other one, sclerenchyma. So collenchyma walls are thickened at the corner with cellulose and pectin deposits, thus strengthening the tissue. That's why the plant is able to stand upright. Parenchyma, irregular cells, thin-walled, loosely packed with intercellular air spaces for storage of food. So this one is mainly for storage of food, the parenchyma, because of the spaces that are there. They are loosely packed. The cells are loosely packed, the parenchyma cells, hence they carry out the function of storage of water, food, and all that. Also allow air to pass. At least that's why I mentioned gaseous exchange. Some parenchyma cells contain chloroplast and chlorenchyma, meaning that they manufacture their own food. There are those green stem in some plants which manufacture food. Not all of them. In some, especially those are in arid and semi-arid areas. Then we have sclerenchyma, walls thickened by lignin. You know this guy. Lignin is what? It is a strengthening material, so serves as a strengthening tissue. So this combined with the collenchyma, they strengthen and ensure that the plant is upright at any given time, unless unachukua shoka na unakata chini, unakata. Otherwise, and when you are doing that, you are actually dealing with this strengthening tissue. When you are using that axe and hitting the plant in the name of wanting to put it down so that you can use it for timber, or you have that power saw cutting the stem hapo chini, sasa unataka kutengeneza nyumba, you want to clear the bush, maybe the forest, unaenda huko, Mau forest, you want to cut down the trees. This is what you contend with. Hiyo nguvu yote ya shoka na power saw is basically dealing with this pectin deposit and the lignin deposits. I think it is well understood. So this also plays a major role in support, mechanical support in the other topic, the last topic. So we are now marrying the two. So we understand it better, of course, ensure that, remember we say knowledge or these concepts overlap sometimes they build on each other, so that at least we are able to follow it up well. Then we have the pith, central region with parenchyma cells that store food and water. Pith, basically this mostly in the Dicotyledonus plants. You have pith in the center. One of the difference between the dicot and the monocotyledonous stem is the presence of pith in that. Then the vascular bundles, these guys are there. They run the length of the plant from the roots all the way to the leaves, where they deposit for the xylem to deposit water into the palisade cells for photosynthesis, photolysis. And then we have the xylem the phloem running from the leaves all the way to the roots, bringing dissolved food, manufactured food. So these two run the length of the plant. So we've seen their function, so we don't have to labor much on them. Comparison between the structure of the monocot stem and the roots, they are there. I think you can see them. The monocot root have many vascular bundles, that's the xylem and the phloem alternating on the shape. Of course, tumesema hiyo. Dicot, phloem, and xylem arranged alternately, forming a ring. This is for the roots, rather for the stem. Then for the roots, we have them here. So take note of that. I think you can come up with the differences on your own because they are glaring. You can easily note a few differences between monocot and dicot root, between monocot and dicot stem. So hiyo nimewaachia, you can look at them. We move on. Other differences in dicot and monocot, this is now general for the plant. Flowers, I think these ones are not necessary for us at this point, but just to have a glimpse. Difference between dicot and monocot. This under classification. When we are dealing with the Spermatophyta, we said we have two subclasses, that is Gymnospermatophyta and Angiospermatophyta. And the Angiospermatophyta, we have dicot plants and the monocotyledonous plants, the classes. So take note of that. We don't need to labor much on them. So the two first diagrams, A and B, these are for how water molecules now are absorbed. This is now for absorption of water and mineral salt. Water and minerals, how they are absorbed. So they move the arrows there, show the direction of movement of water and mineral salts. Here, the diagram C, this is where we have the soil, of course, underwater. Of course, water is absorbed from the soil into the root hair cell. So these ones are the root hair cell. You can see elongated, have the hypertonic subvacule. We also said the walls are thin for rapid absorption of water. So the water will get in through osmosis. Dissolved food nutrients, rather dissolved mineral salts will get in through active transport. Diffusion first, then followed by, once there are more here, still more are required from outside. Now active transport comes in so that materials are absorbed into the root hair cells. Once they are in the root hair cells, what happens? this becomes now hypotonic. The subvacule of this cell becomes hypertonic, rather hypotonic, having more water than this than the solute. Dennis, what are you saying? Dennis, let me just get Dennis nako wapi? Dennis, somebody's raising up their hand. Anamepotea. Which Dennis is that? Dennis, where are you? I cannot see him. I think I continue. Dennis baadaye. So once water gets in here, this becomes hypotonic to these cells. Hence, water molecules will now, this one becomes hypertonic to this. Hence, water molecules will get here through osmosis. This one is having enough water, it becomes hypotonic to these ones. These ones become hypertonic, huyu atakuwa hypotonic, less concentrated with more water, hence more water inaingia hapa. This one nikipata maji, water molecules becomes hypotonic, this one becomes hypertonic to this, hence water through osmosis inapita inaingia hapa. Then finally into the xylem. Alternatively, water molecules will pass through the cell wall. Water will pass through the cell wall in the same way, so that the water molecules can reach the xylem vessel here. So that is absorption of water and mineral salts. In a short but brief description. Then we have our next slide. Absorption of water and mineral salts. We start with absorption of water. Water is drawn into the root hair cells by osmosis. This one is common. From Form 1, when you studied about osmosis, we say one of the roles of osmosis is for absorption of water and mineral salts. Yes, I can see somebody saying we have another lesson. Just remember we started late, so I just need to have 2-3 minutes to talk about this, so that we see the importance of this absorption. Thank you very much for that reminder. Water molecules are absorbed by the root hair through osmosis. The cell sap, I'm just trying to repeat what I've said from that diagram. Cell sap of the root hair cells contain dissolved substances to make its concentration to be greater. That's hypertonic to the soil water. Then there is existing that concentration gradient between the sap and the soil water, and this exerts higher osmotic pressure, drawing water molecules from the soil across the cell wall and the cell membrane into the cell. From that, now water molecules will be moving from one cell to another through diffusion, rather through osmosis, as I have said in that diagram. The osmotic pressure forces are exerted by the cell overcome water retaining power of the soil. Thus, water enters the root hair cells. I think that is what I've said. So we'll just want to show you this. This is again another diagram to emphasize on the same. Water molecules are in the soil here. then the cells up here is highly concentrated, it's hypertonic, hence drawing water through osmosis. Of course, there's osmotic pressure that is created, hence pushing the water into the cell. From here now is the cortex. Water molecules pass through the cortex cells, one cell after another through diffusion. Hii ikiwa inapata maji becomes hypotonic. This one becomes hypotonic. Eventually, water molecules get into the endodermis. The blue one here is endodermis, and this endodermis, of course, has the Casparian strip that now regulates the amount of water that gets into the xylem. This one is xylem, and once the water is in the xylem, we know it will move up through the 4 forces we are going to look at. That is the transpiration pull, root pressure, and also capillarity. So this is about the absorption of water molecules by the root hair cells. So we have a small literature to end up on that. And this is the same as what we have been discussing. So I think that is clear. So the diagrams, the 2 diagrams, explain them well. We have this diagram here and these diagrams. They try to explain how water molecules get in. Remember, when I was showing you the purpose of, rather the specific objectives of this topic, one we said by the end of this topic, the learner should be able to describe the absorption of water and mineral salts by the root hair cells. So I believe now you have at least a reminder of what you have learned. Remember, we are not learning new things, we are just repeating what we learned so that it becomes clearer. So I beg to stop here. If you have any question, you can channel it through the other platform, the WhatsApp platform, to your various teachers, or also to me. Otherwise, let us stop there. Just to recap, I beg for 1 minute. We said transport is a process of movement of materials from one part of the plant, from one part of the body of an organism to another one. If it is an unicellular organism, from one part of the cell to another. If it is multicellular organism, from one cell to another, and so on and so forth. Then we said materials that are transported include nutrients, that is glucose, vitamins, talk of water, we talk of amino acid, fatty acids, all that. Then we also have hormones that are transported. We have nitrogenous waste, we have the gases, all those are materials that are transported in water. Then in plants and animals, then importance of transport, we said it is to, 1, avail those materials that are required in the plants, and also to eliminate waste products from the plants or from the organisms in general. Then, and after that, we talked about for us to be able to talk about transport, we said we look at transport in animals and also in plants. We started with plants. We said for us to understand transport in plants, we must look at the structures that are involved, and that is why we looked at the root, function, and structure. We looked at the adaptations, then the stem, function, and adaptation, and the structure. So those are the bits that we've looked at. And finally, we touched on absorption of water by the root hair cells to show that this water is required somewhere in the xylem. So, and we said we cannot transport what we don't have. So for us to transport water from the within the plants, they must be absorbed. Remember, these plants cannot obtain the water from the rain directly. They don't have that mechanism. The water has to land in the soil, then from there now they can be absorbed by the root hair cells, as we have discussed. Otherwise, for the questions, I think a few questions, you'll get it through the WhatsApp so that we can engage on what we have discussed until we meet again. Our next meeting will be according to the timetable is on Tuesday, so be ready then, so that at least we continue. Otherwise, don't give up. Continue reading. Continue preparing. Despite what has happened, we still have to sit for KCSE, and this means we are given an opportunity to revise and revise well, so that by the time we come back to school and start all over again, we are at a very high level in terms of preparedness. So wacha exam ikuje, penye itakuja wakati hiyo, we will be more than prepared if we use this time well. Otherwise, continue working hard, continue staying safe, and I wish you